Hi guys. So in today's lesson we are going to look at, was Dunkirk a success or failure for Britain? We've got two learning objectives. We're going to try to understand how the Nazis took over or occupied so much of Europe so quickly, and we're also going to try to decide whether the evacuation of Dunkirk was a success or a failure for Britain. Now, as always, you've got this worksheet in Google Classrooms to work through, and I'll prompt you when you need to complete tasks. The work is due in Sunday the 28th of June by 5 p.m. Please make sure you press submit, don't just leave your work there. And if you've got any questions, any concerns, feel free to email either your teacher or myself, gbrown@stopsleyhighschool.co.uk. So, we know from last lesson that Hitler invaded Poland in September 1939, and he used technology to help invade quickly. And when I say that, what I mean is vehicles such as aeroplanes, tanks, motorcycles were used so that Hitler could get troops quickly into a country without any warning. Now, this type of warfare using these vehicles moving quickly was called blitzkrieg or lightning war. And that's really quite different to what we'd seen before in World War I, if you remember, where trenches were dug and troops would run out into no man's land and get mowed down by machine guns, a much slower form of warfare. Blitzkrieg uses technology to get past all of that, and I haven't really got time to dig trenches. But for months, there was no real fighting at all after the invasion of Poland. Britain prepared for the war, but some people in Britain thought it was a fake war because there was no fighting. They called it a phony war as a result. But this all changed in 1940. When all of a sudden we see the Nazi army start to invade large parts of Europe quickly, using that blitzkrieg tactic. From February to May 1940, several countries were invaded, and you can see them here on this map. Or we could say they were occupied, that key term there again. Now these included Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium and Luxembourg. And you can see there on the map as well, France is also shaded in red. The 10th of May 1940, France was invaded by the Nazis. Now, this was a huge problem for Britain because we had sent over the main part of our army, the British Expeditionary Force, in 1939 to help fight the Nazis back away from Europe. Now, our army was situated in France and the Nazis invaded. Our army was now at risk of being captured. We needed to, if they couldn't fight the Nazis, we needed to bring our army back home without them being captured. Now, the 10th of May was also a big time in Britain because there was a change in leadership. Neville Chamberlain stepped down as the Prime Minister of Britain. Politicians said they weren't prepared to work with him any longer. And instead, he was replaced, of course, by Winston Churchill. So, let's have a look. Those few slides set the lesson up nicely here. Have a look at this gap fill. Can you please complete this gap fill? I've told you what the words begin with to help. Use the green slides to help you. Pause the video and then press play to continue. Okay, you can mark your own work here so you can see whether you've got the words correct or not. Can you just check the spelling please as well? Some of those words are very basic, but some of them, like blitzkrieg, you might have spelled correctly and understandably so. Just make sure you've got it correct before you submit that work. Let's move on. So the Nazis invaded France quickly and ruthlessly, just like they had done with the other countries of mainland Europe. And the French and the British armies really were no match for them at all. They were pushed back very quickly. And they were pushed back to the only port left, and you can see it here, Dunkirk. And the army was basically pushed back onto the beach. And if you look at that map, you can see that effectively the British army was surrounded. The Nazis were surrounding them, and the water of the Channel was also surrounding them as well, about 20 miles away or so from England. The Nazi army itself was 10 miles away from the British troops on the beach, and they were waiting for Hitler's orders to advance and capture the British army. Now, people don't know why this didn't happen. Why didn't the army just push on? Some people in the past have thought that Hitler wanted peace, so he was prepared to do a deal with Churchill to say, look, surrender or I'll wipe your army out. Modern historians tend to agree with the fact that the Nazi tanks were 10 miles away, but actually they were waiting for the troops to catch up. Because the vehicles had sped through France so quickly, they were now far ahead of the infantry, the foot troops, who were marching along, and before the tanks wanted to move onto the beach, they were waiting for those foot troops to catch up, in case it was a trap. Either way, the British army was trapped, it was surrounded by the Nazis and the Channel, and they needed rescuing. You get this idea of a huge amount of men, 400,000 men on the beach, just trapped there straight away. Now, to cap it all off, when they begin the rescue mission, Churchill's only been Prime Minister for 16 days as well. So it could be he's going to lose the entire army before, he's even really began his leadership. Now, like we said, Hitler expected Britain to surrender. I mean, why not? He's been able to crush every other country in mainland Europe he's tried to occupy, and Britain is only a tiny island. And in fact, several politicians told Churchill to ask the Nazis for peace as well. Otherwise, the Germans would just wipe the army out on the beach. However, Churchill did something different. Churchill began Operation Dynamo. This was an evacuation or a rescue plan. We were going to bring our troops back home. Now, the plan would go like this. The Royal Navy would send boats to France across the Channel, and they would pick the soldiers up and bring them back to Britain. Now, civilians with boats were expected to let the Royal Navy use those boats if needed to go across the Channel as well. They were expected to surrender their boats. But actually, a lot of civilians got involved as well. Lots of civilians took their own small boats out across to France and brought troops back home as a result. It was really a we're all in this together effort. Now, these poor soldiers on the beach, they had to be protected. They had no anti-aircraft guns. So actually, there was nothing to stop German planes, the Luftwaffe, from flying over the beach and just machine gunning these soldiers down. The English soldiers on the beach needed the British soldiers, on the beach needed protection. So what happened was the RAF made regular trips across the Channel to fight the German planes, the Luftwaffe. And they're the only protection these soldiers had from air attacks. There weren't any anti-aircraft guns. So the RAF would fly over to France, they would patrol, and they would shoot down any enemy aircraft they could see, and then they would fly back. They would put themselves at risk. So what happened in this evacuation process? Well, about 340,000 of the 400,000 men were rescued. They were brought back home, and that meant Britain could fight another day. It meant Britain did not need to surrender there on the beaches of France. And just to show how much of a collective effort this was, about 26,500 of these soldiers were rescued by civilians, going over in small boats into a war zone and bringing people back home. Now that sounds like a huge success, but this did cost the Allies as well. Over 68,000 men were killed, captured, missing or wounded. Because not every soldier could be on that beach waiting to be rescued, and there wasn't time to rescue every soldier as well. Some soldiers had to stay in the towns near Dunkirk and keep fighting the Nazis so they couldn't get onto the beach until the men had been rescued. And that meant either sacrificing their lives or becoming prisoners of war as a result. Also, people were killed on the beaches by the Luftwaffe planes, as we've discussed already, and also some boats were sunk, as we're going to see in a minute. So this success mission did have some casualties as well. There were 75,000 vehicles lost, military vehicles, so for example, tanks. The idea was that they were brought over on huge ships, and actually you couldn't get them back on the boats afterwards. We've seen the sizes of these small vessels that came to pick people up, and there wasn't space. You had to get as many people on as possible. So before the rescue mission happens, British soldiers would try to destroy the engine of the vehicle so it couldn't move again, so that the Germans couldn't reuse it. But actually a lot of material that was there the Germans could reuse, they could fix. And so inadvertently, the German army became a bit stronger as well. The same goes for machine guns, normal guns, ammunition, and the RAF lost half of their planes in the battle for France from 1939 to 1940. And just protecting the troops from the Luftwaffe in Dunkirk, they lost about 100 planes. And over 200 boats and 6 destroyers, a big ship that you can see there, was sunk on the rescue mission. Not every boat was able to come back, and that included some civilian boats as well, sadly. The Luftwaffe planes would also fly over the channel, and they would sink enemy ships, British ships, sorry. And so that's why the RAF were needed, to make sure that as many boats as possible could come back over the channel. Now, Dunkirk obviously could be seen as a success because of the rescue of 340,000 men and the fact that they could fight again as a result, or the fact that actually there was a huge cost as a result. The fact so many people didn't come back to Britain, the fact that vehicles were lost, guns were lost. I mean, Churchill had to ask museums after the evacuation of Dunkirk to look for weapons they might have on display that could be used if the Germans were going to invade. It was a huge amount of equipment being left behind in Dunkirk, and our army was of short supply for quite a time. What I'd like you to do is have a look at that task 2 for me then, please. Do you think overall Dunkirk was a success or a failure for Britain? Explain your answer fully in a paragraph, and I want you to pick one side. Obviously, it could be seen as either a success or a failure, but it could be seen as both, I know that. But you pick one or the other. Now, you might say it was a small success or a small failure. That's okay. But don't just say it was both. Right? Pick one side. I know that can be quite tough. And I'm looking for a paragraph, not just 2 lines. Press pause here to complete that task. The yellow slides will help. When you're done, press play to continue. So, Churchill told the nation that the battle for France was over. The Battle of Britain would now begin as a result. You've probably heard this speech before where he says, "We shall fight them on the beaches, we shall fight them on the landing ground and so on. We shall never surrender." Very famous speech that Churchill gave. He was trying to really motivate a nation because he was aware of the fact that Britain was in danger. The Nazis had taken over Europe, and they would now begin plans to invade our island as well. Mainland Europe was taken over by the Nazis, and now they were looking to move further and take over our small little country as well. We're going to look and see what the Nazi plans were for invasion and why they failed next lesson. So, that's it for today. Work due in Sunday the 28th of June by 5 p.m, please. Make sure you press submit. Don't just leave your work lying there in Google Classrooms. Any questions or feedback? gbrown@stopsyhighschool.co.uk. And all that remains for me to say is, as always, thank you for completing today's lesson. Please look after yourselves, get some fresh air, get some exercise, etc. And I will see you next week. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.